Palestinian people or nation has been recurring. There's been a charge thrown at the Palestinian cause since the beginning of the 20th century. This idea that the Palestinian people or nation doesn't compare to other peoples or nations, most directly the Jewish people or nation. I think that this is in part the result of a shared 19th century assumption of the superiority of European civilizations. The idea that a civilized nation is worthy of the name, and that other groups are something else. Tribes. So we get a long range of quotations. This is from Lord Arthur Balfour. Balfour was the author, the British foreign minister, and the author of the declaration that made it clear that it was British policy to support Zionism. This is his quote. Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long tradition, of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inherit this ancient land. Explicitly, the argument is made that the Jewish claim on nationhood, and therefore the claim on this land, is stronger, has deeper roots than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs. Some people will make this explicit. This is Golda Meir, one of the founding mothers of the Israeli state, a towering figure in Zionism, a Milwaukee school teacher, who will eventually become the foreign minister and then the prime minister of the state of Israel. Quote, "There was no such thing as Palestinians. They did not exist." David Ben-Gurion, the single most important founder of the state of Israel, the first prime minister, the charter of the Declaration of Independence, the life of Zionism. Quote, "I believe then, as I do today, that we had a clear title to this country. Not the right to take it away from others, parentheses, there were no others, but the right and the duty to fill its emptiness, restore life to its barrenness, to recreate a modern version of our own nation, and I felt we owed this not only to ourselves, but to the land as well. This is all summed up in the long-standing Zionist slogan, a land without a people, for a people without a land." Implicit in much of Zionism's confrontation with the Palestinian Arabs, then, has been the assumption that only Zionists should be in this land that had been promised to them. That the backward trespassers who were there should be removed, and that this shouldn't be much of a problem. Should be removed. Think about the implications. Think about, why does history matter, right? Why does history matter? If these people are a nation and they have a claim to this land, then they are not easily removed. If, on the other hand, they are Arabs just like any other, right? If they are no different from Egyptian or Jordanian Arabs, then what's it to them? They can be easily moved around. That's why this argument is important. This is Theodor Herzl, okay? The father of Zionism, writing in his diary in 1896. "We shall have to spirit the penniless population across the border, while denying them employment in our own country. Both the process of expropriation and the removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly and circumspectly. If the Palestinians have no claim on the land, and this is Zionist land, this is land for the state of Israel, then they've got to go." In practice, in theory, this meant the purchase of Palestinian land by legitimate prices. In practice, it meant not only purchase, but simple destruction or appropriation. The so-called new historians of the Israeli Academy have done a great deal of research on this, have estimated that some 400 distinct Palestinian towns and villages were, quote, "completely destroyed, with their houses, garden walls, cemeteries, and tombstones, so that literally not a stone remains standing. Visitors are passing by and told, quote, it was all desert." I can speak to this with my own experience. When I was in Israel a few years ago, my guide, a graduate student at Tel Aviv University, was driving me between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and we passed this gigantic landfill. And he said, "Oh, well, you got to look at this." Well, it's a landfill, but it has an Arabic name. It was a town. The town's gone. I don't for a minute want to make the argument to you that the Israelis are the first people ever to behave this way. I don't want to make an argument that the Israeli claim on the land is somehow bogus. Folks, if there was only one good claim on the land, we would have been done with this a long time ago. The problem is that these invented nationalisms are equally powerful, are equally legitimate in the eyes of their participants. Both of these people think that they are a nation that is attached to this land. Now, it is true that few people think of themselves as Palestinian in 1850. There was only an administrative region called Palestine, part of the largest province of Syria within the Ottoman Empire. The term Palestine itself is ancient. It's cognate with Philistine. It is present. The word Palestine is used in descriptions by Herodotus of the region. But that's not the same thing. We can say that the term Palestine is used. That's not the same thing as asserting that the people who are there are Palestinians in a modern national sense. That idea is a 20th century phenomenon. We can see it. We know we see it by 1911 in the publication of the newspaper Palestine in Jaffa, which addressed its readers, Christian, Muslim, and Jew, as Palestinians. It was actually edited. This was a famous and powerful editing pair of brothers, Christian Palestinian Arabs. Called its readers Palestinians. Over the next decade, under the establishment of the pseudo-colony of Palestine under British rule, all residents were called Palestinians. Whether they were Jewish Zionist in-migrants or Palestinian Arabs who had lived there a long time, whether those Arabs were Christian or Muslim, everyone was a Palestinian. Again, I can speak to this. During the 1930s, German Jewish Zionists having meetings in Germany thinking about migration always referred to those townsmen who had emigrated as Palestinians. The term Israeli doesn't really mean anything at this point. There are Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Arabs. The term Israeli never really does have much currency until the actual founding of the country in 1948. And it is after Israeli independence that Arab-Palestinian nationhood takes on momentum. I'm saying that I think it is true that Arab-Palestinian nationalism, the idea of Palestine as a nation, of Palestinians as a nation, this is a largely post-48 phenomenon. But so what? So is the very idea of nationhood recent. Beginning in Europe, this idea of a nation, of politics and a state corresponding to a coherent ethnic or maybe religious group, this really only becomes a global phenomenon at the end of the 19th and into the 20th century. And both Zionism and Palestinian nationalisms are reflections of this larger trend. They happen at about the same time. They develop one in response to the other. Castor and Pollux join forever by geography and history. But then the idea that comes out of a one-sided denunciation of Palestinian nationhood as invented, as if it is not legitimate, while Israeli nationhood has some greater legitimacy. This idea, a la Gingrich, that these are only Arabs who would be just at home someplace else. To me, if I'm candid, smacks a very great deal of map makers who carve up Africa at the end of the 19th century without taking into account what they sneered at as mere tribalisms. Or if we want to hit a little closer to home, our insistence that there's no such thing as Sioux, Cherokee, Hopi, and Lakota, that they are all only Indians. Seems to be some reluctance to grant the national aspirations of people of color the same dignity as those of Europeans. Not all Jews are Israelis, or vice versa. No one would ever dream of asserting that if Jews are unhappy in one place, they should just go to Israel. That would be stone anti-Semitism. Why would we do that with Arabs? History matters. History matters because we can know the history of nationalisms. We can recognize that all nationalisms are invented. Folks, no one considers themselves Americans until a decade or two before the Revolution. It doesn't mean it wasn't real or isn't real. Knowing the history, realizing that Israeli and Palestinian emerged at roughly the same time, ought to temper our quickness to judge the rightness of other people's aspirations to nationhood. Realizing the invented character of our own nationality might have the same effect. This is from a famous historian of the Middle East, a man named James